Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes. We've been talking in recent weeks about the fact that mainstream scientists still refuse to investigate nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife-related evidence, even though that evidence would shed light on many of the things that now puzzle scientists most. To cite a few examples, evidence that afterlife researchers are developing helps us propose good explanations for things like dark matter and dark energy, the Big Bang, the finely tuned cosmological constants that keep this universe stable, the source and nature of human consciousness, and whether or not we have free will. And those are just a few of the scientific conundrums that have been in the news in recent weeks, with which, frankly, afterlife-related evidence would be very helpful. So why is it that every physicist, every consciousness researcher, every mainstream scientist, everyone still stonewalls everything that has anything to do with afterlife research? Why? Well, I can see three pretty compelling reasons why. First, it's political. Actually, isn't everything political when you think about it? Few afterlife researchers are trained scientists. For example, I'm a practicing attorney. So real scientists feel justified in thinking that it would be impossible for us, little us, to contribute anything that they might find useful. Second, believe it or not, mainstream science stopped being an actual science about 100 years ago. Tragically, mainstream science at that point transformed itself into what amounts to one more closed-minded belief system. It's just another religion now, and frankly, that explains a lot. Third, of course, is the big problem that the afterlife-related evidence suggests that some of the most cherished scientific tenets probably are wrong. If we'd developed evidence, we afterlife researchers, that showed that everything is material, then believe me, scientists would be all over that. But the evidence we're developing seems to show that, in fact, everything is what you might call spiritual, although I think another word eventually is going to be used. But spiritual is the closest word we have to use right now. And reality, if reality is entirely spiritual, and if that's what we're showing, then scientists will not touch that kind of stuff with a 100-foot pole. Our guest today is your host. The most surprising fact of my whole life is that after a lifetime of trying to understand what's true about death, outside the strictures of anybody's beliefs, just trying to understand what's true, I find that this pursuit of the truth has led me onto a little tiny island of enormous truths in a muddled sea of confusing and mutually exclusive old scientific and religious beliefs. There are other people on this island, too. All over the world are thousands of researchers who've undertaken this same open-minded search for the truth, unclouded by anyone's religious or secular beliefs. I'm meeting more and more of them all the time, and it's fun because whenever I meet them, we complete each other's sentences. We've done this research, and we've all come to the same conclusions. And now you're here. Thank you. If you're listening now, then you're also trying to figure out what really is going on without any kind of coloring by anybody's beliefs. We just want the truth. Today, I'm going to talk about what our understanding of the truth is, how it's dawning and how it's growing, and basically where we are now. And I'm going to talk about what it's like to begin to discover and to use these truths. I'm also going to talk about what it's like to be standing here with 7 billion other people and watching this great parade of mainstream science and mainstream Christianity continuing to trumpet their separate belief-based guesses, and that's what they amount to, about reality, just guesses. Even after you and I have learned better, we know that it's possible now to begin to understand what actually factually is true, uncolored by anybody's dogmas. So we stand here, we're watching the same old nonsense being paraded before us by mainstream science and Christianity as if they knew what they were talking about. And finally, like that little boy in the fable, we cannot resist any longer shouting, hey, wait a minute, can't anybody see it? Both of our emperors are stark naked. I have spent my whole life studying the afterlife evidence, but it really was only after the first edition of The Fun of Dying was published in 2010 that I turned my attention to the fact that we're learning much more from the afterlife evidence than just the truth about death. In fact, afterlife researchers seem to have stumbled upon a whole new field of scientific inquiry that strongly affects all the other scientific fields. This is amazing. My fellow afterlife researchers and I seem to have discovered nothing less than the third wave of physics. And it is a physics that is entirely consciousness-based. We're coming to see that the inescapable truth is that all of reality is based in human consciousness. The theory that finally will unite both Newtonian and quantum physics is going to be found in the open-minded study of the powers of human consciousness. I'm not just the only one saying this. It's all as Max Planck predicted. I love this man. Dr. Planck was one of the greatest physicists who ever lived. He received the 1918 Nobel Prize in Physics as the father of quantum mechanics. And in fact, physicists love this man. They name things after him. The Planck level, I think, is the lowest possible level of reality or whatever. I don't know. They love him. They revere him. I do too. He received the Nobel Prize for quantum mechanics, but he should have received a second Nobel Prize for his greater insight that human consciousness is primary and pre-existing. Human consciousness is primary and pre-existing. In 1931, he said, get this, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. Max Planck was exactly right. There's at least one working physicist who agrees with what the afterlife researchers are learning and agrees with Dr. Planck. He's in, I think, good company. Thomas Campbell's My Big Toe, get it, TOE, T-O-E, Theory of Everything, TOE, was published in 2007. It's written for physicists. I found it absolutely boggling, but also intriguing. So I went to hear him speak when he came to the University of Texas in Austin a few years back. There I was in this big auditorium, all these young, impossible. Is it possible that these people were actually college students? They looked so young, and there was old me sitting among them, listening to Dr. Campbell expound what was essentially my same theory of everything. I was astonished. I had developed my theory and was in the process of developing it further based upon the afterlife evidence. I never even took physics in high school. I was just trying to understand how things fit together and reading a lot of quantum physics for dummies books and other things. He had reached my same conclusions using standard physics. I bet he even used math. That was an overwhelming moment for me. It was a validation of everything that I was trying to do intellectually. It was unbelievable. It isn't only attorney hobbyists who are beginning to work out the third wave of physics, but there are real physicists doing it too. A truth, they're still being mostly ignored. Dr. Campbell, unfortunately, is being ignored, but not for much longer. It won't be much longer. There is going to be a physicist who is going to win a Nobel Prize in Physics for developing a consciousness theory of everything. If he's still alive when that happens, I hope it will be Dr. Campbell. So how did we get into this mess? How is it possible that science went so far off the rails? science is supposed to be the open-minded study of what really is going on, isn't it? But it's devolved into just another belief system. How is that even possible? We've got one more religion? Who on earth needs one more religion? Well, I date this problem to the early 20th century, but there are people I respect who tell me it goes back to Plato and Aristotle, believe it or not. It was decided 2,000 years ago, for reasons lost in antiquity, that we had to divide the study of what's physical from the study of what is spiritual. As if we even could make such a division. How is that even possible? Then in the early 20th century, a major effort was undertaken by the dead that may have been meant to coincide with the development of the theory of quantum mechanics, which was going on at about the same time. I've come to believe that a full century ago, we were supposed to be making the wonderful leap forward in our understanding that only is about to happen now, sad to say. It had happened when it was supposed to happen back 100 years ago. Everyone who is now hearing my voice would have known from your birth that your mind is an eternal part of the same creative force that brings forth the universe. Sadly, however, rather than actually studying what early 20th century researchers were assembling for their use and their delectation, this wonderful body of evidence, which is where I learned much of what I learned about the afterlife, the scientists of the day lumped it all together with, quote, religion. They wouldn't look at any of it. As more and better afterlife evidence was developed, in fact, they erected a further fence by making atheistic materialism a, quote, fundamental scientific dogma. And yes, you can find those words in print. That was when science jumped the shark. Anything that has dogmas is a belief system. By definition, their fundamental dogma is scientific, believe it or not, atheistic materialism. They have a lot of others too. In fact, probably 10, 15 that they hold to. If you don't believe those, then you can't practice science in a traditional setting in most cases. Very tragic. But that was a whole 100 years ago that they went briefly crazy. Why, in the 21st century, is the scientific community still insisting on being so stubbornly wrong by holding to dogmas, not pursuing truth in an open-minded way? Well, I think there are several reasons. First, of course, there still exists that ancient notion that it's necessary, in fact, that it's even possible to compartmentalize the truth into material and spiritual camps. Dear friends, reality is reality. If there actually is a spiritual side to reality, then for scientists to achieve anything like a complete understanding of what's going on, they must incorporate the spiritual evidence into their work together with the material evidence. Isn't that common sense? We've got to study everything if we're going to have a theory of what's going on. What are they thinking? And science erects surprisingly high barriers against any big new ideas. Perhaps that's a good thing, but our wonderful friend, Dr. Max Planck, found it frustrating when he saw that the physicists of his day were accepting and beginning to use quantum physics. I mean, they didn't love it, but they were accepting that it was real, and they were actually going at it. They were doing that, but nobody was willing to study what he had found was the biggest implication of the theory of quantum physics, which, of course, was that human consciousness is primary and pre-existing. When he saw what was going on, he sadly observed that science advances by deaths. He thought it might maybe take another generation for his biggest theory to be taken seriously. Of course, so far, it's taken at least 3 generations. We might be in the 4th generation. And the scientists working today are fighting, studying the afterlife evidence as hard as they ever have. There is no softening at all in their attitudes. No matter how confused they are about things now, no matter how deep in the weeds they are, they will not look at what's right in front of their noses. They continue to fight the afterlife evidence because this really is big. It turns out that we've found a whole new paradigm. And it's difficult to upset old paradigms that every working scientist learned in school and around which his or her whole career is built. If all the scientists working now were forced to study what afterlife researchers have been learning about reality over the past 100 years, that could wreck a great many very comfortable careers. It may seem difficult to grasp, but the evidence being developed by afterlife researchers really does change everything. Everything. It fits with existing scientific principles, but it's big enough that it might require a whole new approach to doing science. I think perhaps it will. It's never easy for any of us to be forced to accept the fact that a lot of our most cherished premises upon which our careers, maybe our whole lives, are built, are being shown now to be wrong. It's not easy to accept anything that has the potential to change everything. To put it another way, most people can see a tree or two, right? Near-death experiences, afterlife communications. I mean, we see individual things if we're looking from the outside that are being developed by afterlife researchers, and we say, oh, I can debunk that, near-death experiences. I could figure out a way to make that go away. Afterlife communications, something else I could make go away. But it's hard for someone who's not in the field of afterlife studies, and in fact for someone like a scientist who frankly is hoping that whole field will just go away, it's hard for them to realize how many trees there are. It is boggling. It's hard until you're really into it to grasp the fact that the few trees we're seeing now are part of a forest that entirely swallows and in fact goes far beyond the neat little grove of material trees that for centuries scientists have been sure must be all there were. No more trees than that. If I'm a working scientist, I want this big shift in paradigm to happen after my retirement. Thank you very much. I don't blame them. I would feel the same way, I think. Another problem, I do blame them, but I don't blame them in a way. Another problem is that physicists like to use math. But math seems to be a useful tool for the study of reality only in this material universe. And I'm glad about that, by the way, because I'm bad at math. This material universe turns out to be just a small part of the reality that afterlife researchers are glimpsing. The rest of reality, and this includes only the part of the greater reality of which the dead seem to be aware, mind you, and there might be a whole lot more that they don't even know about. But just this part could be 6 or 7 times the size of this whole universe, and it seems to be entirely consciousness-based. Wow. I'm going to give you just 2 great examples of how this new paradigm fits with and sheds light on the old, how it would help scientists to do their work if they studied this information. This isn't, as I say, just about death and what happens after death. This is about what reality actually is when glimpsed from outside it, I suppose, or from a different viewpoint of it. It is extraordinary how much information there is that scientists are ignoring. And there are many, many ways that this information could be of use to them. We're just going to look at 2 because these 2 are hot right now in the current scientific press. The first one is kind of long to talk about. The second is short and snappy. All right, first, let's talk about the fact that all of what mainstream scientists study encompasses less than 5% of what they tell us that they know actually exists. 5%. Everything scientists talk about they know encompasses less than 5% of the universe. That's material, frankly, energy and matter, isn't it? 27% of the universe, though, is dark matter, and an amazing 68% is dark energy. They call this more than 95% of the universe dark only because they know it's there, but it won't interact with material photons. It neither sheds nor reflects material light. So it is not material. That much we know. Remember that basic fact. It's apparently not material. Remember, too, that scientists have a fundamental dogma, which is that reality must be material. So they're stuck with knowing that 95% of reality actually is not material. Will they tell us that? No, of course they won't tell us that. They don't like to think about it themselves. Instead, they've taken to assuming that in this very precise universe, and the universe must be precise or it would either collapse upon itself or fall apart almost instantly. In this extraordinarily precise universe, 6/7 of the matter has to be just clouds of random particles. I just saw a video in which they talk about the latest theories, the 5 latest theories of what dark matter might be. In every case, they're WIMPs, they're quarks, they're this, they're that. They're clouds of particles. In this universe, where everything seems to be so precise, we've suddenly got all this clouds of particles that mean nothing. There's nothing in those spaces at all except particles. It's totally irrational. But they can't even be material particles. Remember the fact this stuff is not material. Scientists know that. They just don't know, and they seem not even to be able to imagine that those supposed non-material particles actually might make up something. So essentially, as to 6/7 of the matter in the universe, mainstream scientists are content to be clueless. So let's you and I help them out with a theory that at least makes a modicum of sense. We know from the afterlife evidence that there are about 6 primary inhabited levels of energy-based reality that exist exactly where we are, but at higher vibratory rates, just like the channels on your TV set. Okay. Now let's gross up 27% of the universe to 30% because I'm really bad at math. So we have 6 levels of the afterlife reality. It goes into 30% of the universe 5 times. So each of those levels could be 5% of the universe, roughly, or about the same size they're each about the same size as the material universe. And that's about what we've been thinking, by the way. We have no way to know for sure, but afterlife researchers have come to understand that they're really huge. So add another 5% for this material level. That's a total of 7 levels of reality, right? 6 afterlife, 1 material. Each of them is about 5% of the material universe. And I guess it's time to break this big news to materialist scientists. What we're coming to understand, going at it from the afterlife approach, is that all of the levels actually are energy-based, and that includes this one. Everything is energy. And the result we get by doing this is exactly what we would see if that dark matter were the non-material levels where the dead reside. We know they're right here. I had thought, before I figured this out, I had thought, I'll bet there must be a way to detect them because they're exactly in the same place where this material universe is. Wow, what a great theory to test. And how do we actually study those levels if we're scientists? It's easy. We stop stonewalling and start investigating the afterlife evidence. Why not? We've tried everything else. Okay, then, what about the more than 2/3 of the universe that mainstream scientists know must be there, but that neither gives off nor reflects physical light? Well, I'm coming to suspect that dark energy actually might be the source of the universe, eternal mind, the energy-like potentiality that continuously manifests this universe. Didn't create it in a big bang and then walk away and do something else, but in fact holds it continuously in perfect suspension. The cosmological constants, which they insist have to be constant, actually, it turns out, vary. We can almost watch eternal mind minutely adjusting them, gravity and the others, just to make sure that the universe stays in constant existence. It's incredible to watch. By the way, they don't tell you that either, that they have to keep adjusting the constants. In fact, they try not to do that, to do any adjustments at all. That's another story. Here's a little extra clue that, in fact, that 68% of the universe may, in fact, be the source. In the summer of 2014, it was discovered that 80% of the light in the nearby universe has no discernible source because it is not related to material photons. 80%, that's 80%. One scientist remarked that discovering this was like going into a big room with no windows, but it's full of light, and you see just 2 60-watt bulbs. That's it. Where the heck is all that non-material light coming from? Well, again, let's help them out with this. When I was 8 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and had a spiritual crisis. And to end it, there was in my room an extraordinary burst of white light. It was in the room. I remember my room 60 years later, my room when I was 8, because of the way that it shone on the walls, on the toys. And there was a voice that talked to me then, but that's another story. This is about that light. I've seen spiritual light. It is much brighter than sunlight. I think it's very likely that the 80% of nearby light in this universe that's not material is in fact spiritual light. And its source has to be that 68% of the universe, which scientists themselves tell us is non-material energy. We've got this non-material energy giving off non-material light. It's perfectly sensible. I don't know if this is right, but listen, to put these things together helps to explain a bit of the dark matter and dark energy conundrum, and also the problem of all the missing photons in the nearby universe. It makes sense. And given Occam's razor holds that the simplest explanation is likely to be the best explanation, the one that makes the fewest assumptions. That's probably right. And scientists love this if it goes in their favor. I'm not sure they'd love it now. But given Occam's razor, my theory at least deserves to be researched, does it not? If it's right, then eventually the truth is going to come out. Scientists cannot escape reality forever. In fact, what they're trying to do is escape it just till their careers end. They can't escape it forever. And if they continue to ignore theories like this that require that we look at the afterlife evidence, and there are theories like this which match many of the scientific conundrums in their troubling scientists today, eventually, if these theories prove to be right, they're not having even considered them when they're presented is going to make them look forever ridiculous. Okay, that was the first way that we might be able to help mainstream scientists with their problems, we afterlife researchers. I don't know about that. I mean, to me, it's a little bit far-fetched. I just think that since there's no explanation that's better, it's something they ought to look at. But I'm going to give you now an example of a scientific puzzle that demands that the afterlife evidence be considered. On this one, I will go to the mat. The Human Genome Project was a major effort to sequence the entire human genome. They already had sequenced a number of lesser genomes. For example, the genome of C. elegans. C. elegans is a long word. The C stands for a long word that I don't know how to pronounce, but everyone calls them C. elegans. It's a tiny, semi-transparent worm, and their genome, these little worms, contains about 21,000 genes. 21,000 genes, that's a lot for such a tiny worm. So naturally, scientists assumed the human genome must contain at least 100,000 genes. There were estimates much higher than that. We have all this intellectual and emotional complexity after all. Our bodies are a whole lot bigger and more complex. Must be many more genes. But then in 2003, the first results of the Human Genome Project were announced. Wow. The human genome had been found to contain only about 24,500 genes. That was stunning. Scientists, many of them were floored by that. But wait, it gets better. In the summer of 2014, it was announced that further work had determined that the human genome contains only about 19,000 genes. That is 2,000 genes fewer than the genome of a worm that is less than 1,000 cells in size and can do little more than react to stimuli. It has, let's say, inside its lack of head, it has no intellectual capacity whatsoever. In fact, nearly the whole human genome turns out to consist of genes that predate even the emergence of primates. Wow. Based upon this amazing finding, it has to be true that either the whole scientific theory of genetics is wrong, or that the human brain cannot possibly be the origin of the human mind. One or the other has to be right. So which is it, scientists? Can you tell us? This is very big news. You've never heard it, though. I'm sure you haven't heard this. I had to dig for it in Scientific American. Why is the scientific community not talking about this? Have you seen it anywhere reported that the human genome actually is smaller than the genome of a worm of fewer than 1,000 cells? I used to say that I blame Christianity less than I blame mainstream science for refusing even to consider the afterlife evidence. And they also, as I say, they're stonewalling us just as much as the scientific community is. But after all, Christianity doesn't claim to be anything more than a belief system, right? In which we can choose to have faith. Isn't that what it is? Well, no, actually not. It claims to give us spiritual truth as opposed to spiritual guesses. Now I can see that we can't let the predominant Western religion off the hook so easily. Think about it. Christianity does claim to have the truth about God, right? The truth about the afterlife. But it seems to us now, after having done this as much research as we've done, that Christianity doesn't even have the truth about Jesus. The afterlife evidence gives us lots of information about what God is and what happens after death that turns out to be very bad news for those who insist that all their Christian beliefs and dogmas have to be right. I'm sorry, I understand how you may be feeling to hear me say this. I was there once too. I was the most devout possible Christian until I entered my 50s, believe it or not. But I was doing research, and eventually, based on what the afterlife researchers are learning and what I was learning, I had to admit that Christianity was wrong. We can say for certain that every mainstream Christian denomination of which I'm aware is wrong in what it says about not just death and the afterlife, but also the nature of God, human nature, and the meaning and purpose of the life of Jesus. And when you're claiming to be the primary source of spiritual truth, those are a great many things to be getting wrong. But Christianity is wrong. I think we can prove that now, and it's horribly wrong. Have you noticed that when you really think about some Christian dogmas, and I didn't do this till after I started to fall out of the faith, when you really think about some of these dogmas, they're appalling. People deserve better. More importantly, of course, Jesus deserves better. He told us he came as our teacher, and that is exactly what he is. He came to earth 2,000 years ago knowing things about God, reality, death, and the afterlife that we could not have confirmed independently until very recently. He told us little things. He told us big things that were right, and we had no way to confirm it until really the 20th century. What Jesus says in a modern English translation of the Gospels turns out to be at least 95% independently verifiable. Isn't that amazing? At least 95%. The rest, we know the Gospels were edited, and I can exactly show you what they edited now. That's incredible when they've translated the Gospels twice, first into Greek and then from Greek into English. The original language was Aramaic. And still to have the language be so accurate that we can actually look at what he said and show what he meant by it now based upon the afterlife evidence, that is boggling to me and thrilling, and it is a miracle from God. Christianity may be wrong, and it is, but Jesus is absolutely right. So I think that Jesus deserves at last to be freed from barbaric Christian dogmas that are rooted in first-century Jewish sacrificial practices, and that's what they are. And God, the source, the eternal mind of which each of our minds is an integral part, God deserves much better than what Christianity has done. I mean, to say that God is so petty and judgmental and plain nasty that God can't forgive us for whatever Adam did until he gets to enjoy watching Jesus horribly die? I mean, what kind of a crazy dogma is that? And I didn't even see it. I was a Christian half my life, and I couldn't see how awful that was. But that's not God. The true God is nothing whatsoever like a human being, has no human failings at all. And God deserves at last to be loved without reservation. Fear is the opposite of love. You cannot love what you fear. With what we know now from the afterlife evidence, the least that God deserves from us is never to be feared again by anyone. So here we are now, you and I, and many others on this little island where only the search for the truth is king. Scientific and religious beliefs and traditions and dogmas no longer are enough for us. So we're trying to find the truth, and we're beginning to find it. And it turns out that the truth is about reality looks now to be more wonderful than our most optimistic imaginings possibly could be. The truth turns out to be glorious. And when the old conspiracy against it crumbles, this wonderful news about reality is going to transform human cultures worldwide in ways that are immense and profound. Learning the truth will transform every aspect of human life, everything for the better. Let's you and me briefly brainstorm together how people will be different once most of us are certain that our minds are eternal. We never began and we never will end. From that perspective, a whole human life on Earth is basically just a really bad afternoon in school, and soon we're all going to go home to what amounts to milk and cookies forevermore, served up with love and lots of hugs by that ultimate parent, eternal mind. When we really get that, how will we change? Well, there are people who already get that and who are getting that. And based upon my observation of them, here are some of my guesses. We're going to become kinder, more loving, more forgiving. That's basic. That just shows we're working harder now to learn our lessons in this tough Earth school. We get it now, and we're trying. We'll also try to learn and grow from our difficulties rather than seeing them as someone else's fault or bad luck or anything else but the great spiritual lessons that they are. You and I will talk more about this on another day, but the evidence is strong that nearly all of us plan into our lives the very messes that plague us while we're here so we can learn and grow from them spiritually. And yes, that even means your mother-in-law, that means your awful boss, first wife, all of the things that you think were bad luck or that you blame other people for, you almost certainly planned those into your life so you could learn from them. Knowing that, we tend to buckle down and really try to learn. And we're going to start taking better care of our minds. This is important. Your mind is where you live forever. You wouldn't dump garbage in the middle of your living room. You can't dump it in your mind either. I've never tried psychotropic drugs. I'm glad about that now, but I was really too straight when I was younger. However, if you take drugs or ever have, I urge you to be clean. Get clean and stay clean for the sake of your mind, if for no other reason. And what you put directly into your mind is very, very important. Once I began to grasp what actually is going on, I stopped cold all violent entertainments. I won't go to a movie unless I'm certain that it's not going to contain violence. I mean, I'm not talking sex. Sex turns out to be fine, but anything violent, anything nasty, anything unpleasant, any outrage between people that upsets you, you can't have that going into your mind now. Eventually, I stopped watching TV altogether. It was impossible to protect my mind from what was there. And my mind is my eternal home. I will not mess with it. You won't either when you get all this stuff. When we understand what's really going on, we're going to be much less materialistic, and I think that's a good thing. What the heck? The evidence suggests that if you're spiritually advanced enough, you actually can take it with you. Believe it or not, they say you can't take it with you. Well, you can if you're spiritually advanced enough. That's another interesting factoid I'll explain to you on another day when we talk about the afterlife more directly. You can take it with you, but the irony is that once you get to your true home, material things are the last thing you're going to want. As people begin to see beyond this brief earth life, we peel away from material concerns, even while we're still here. And it seems that once we know the truth, we no longer fear anything. Fear of death seems to be the base fear. When you conquer that, every other fear seems to go away too. That fact still amazes me, but it's true, not just for me, but for everyone else I've talked to about this. Your mind is eternal, and it is indestructible. And the place where it spends nearly all its eternity is beautiful and full of love. What can possibly exist that you could fear? What may be best of all, though, is that really knowing these truths makes you happy. It makes you so happy. It turns what used to be a tragedy, life sucks, then you die. I remember saying that when I was young. It turns that into the most joyous possible life. I don't think I even really knew what it was like, what happiness really was, until all of this began to click with me. Internalizing these truths really did change everything in my life, and I think it will in yours. sum it up, once you really know these truths about what reality is and what you are, you begin to live your life on a truly eternal scale, and that makes everything so different. Let's think about this on a global scale, too. What are your own dearest hopes for the brightest possible future for yourself, for your family, and also for all humanity? Whatever you're dreaming of, your dreams are much more likely to come true once most people begin to understand what human nature is, what God is, and what the whole of reality encompasses. For example, if you want peace on earth, I think that millennia of civilization filled with cruelty and war and every horror have proven to us by now that learning and applying these truths may be the only way to make peace on earth even possible. So it's worth trying. It's worth breaking through to Christianity, to science, and making them finally stop and look at the afterlife evidence. I think they're both going to be dead-ended until then. More and more, Christianity, by the way, especially, seems to be dead-ended. More and more I'm meeting people who have fallen away from it. They say, I'm more spiritual, I'm less religious. I think in the end, even subconsciously, we're coming to understand that mainstream Christianity should be about Jesus and not about the dogmas. And most denominations are basically stuck with the dogmas, sad to say. They don't even teach as if they were serious. They don't even teach the teachings of Jesus, which are the most, based upon what the dead tell us, the most important things you can possibly do are exactly what Jesus tells us in the Gospels, learning to love and learning to forgive. That's what the churches should be teaching. That's not what they're teaching by and large, and that's why they're in the mess they're in. But I think it won't go on for much longer. I think things really are about to change. One way for you to learn more about our one reality, of course, might be to attend one of the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies' upcoming conferences. Come to Durham, North Carolina from June 11th to 14th of 2015. The topics there will include not only death and afterlife studies, but also speakers on the nature of consciousness, spiritual healing, and other related fields. I mean, this is a whole new science. It's not everything that we think of as, quote, New Age fits. But when people are looking in a serious and disciplined way at some of this stuff, especially in the area of healing and especially in the area of better understanding the powers of our minds, there's a lot that fits and is beautiful to really study. So we'll learn a lot about that in Durham in June. And from September 25th to the 27th of 2015, the Academy is going to hold a conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, of which your host is a co-chair. I'm having a lot of fun with it. Our topic there is life in the afterlife. It seems now that afterlife studies is probably the core discipline from which the study of all these truths about reality is going to spring. There's just so much information there, and it fits so beautifully with everything else. In September, some of the world's greatest experts are going to be sharing with you what they're learning. Some of this is very cutting edge. And I'll be there, too, and I'm going to be a presenter, and I think what I'm going to be talking about is what reality actually is. So you're going to get to learn about reality from a non-physicist big time. I hope you'll come. If you come, I hope you'll let me know that you're there, and because I'd love to meet you. Go to ascsi.org for information about both conferences. That's ascsi.org. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. You are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, and you never will end. And when you fully grasp all the implications of that fact, it is going to change everything in your life. If you'd like to learn more about some of the amazing things we're coming to understand about our one reality, past episodes of Seek Reality are available for free on iTunes. Just search there for Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. My nonfiction books are The Fun of Dying, Find Out What Really Happens Next, and The Fun of Staying in Touch, which explores all the ways that our dead loved ones give us signs of their survival, and also talk about some exciting ways we can contact them. And some of these ways are quite cutting edge. There's a lot happening in this field. We're going to have to update that book every few years. I'm also a novelist, and my novels are, although they're not about the afterlife, they're related to what we're learning about human nature and about the nature of reality. So they're fun. I'm having so much fun writing them, and people are telling me they're having fun reading them. You'll find details about all my books, plus my blog at robertagrimes.com. My guest next time will be the famous Dr. Love. Dr. Jamie Turndorf is an internationally known relationships expert who began her life as an atheist. Then she fell in love with a famous Jesuit priest named Jean Pain. After his noted career as a Jesuit, and this fellow is brilliant, he wrote and spoke 8 languages, wrote innumerable books, crusaded for important causes within the church, like the rights of abused wives to divorce their abusers, for example, and relaxation of contraceptive restrictions. He was a very, very forward-thinking priest. Eventually, Jean left the priesthood honorably, and he went to teach at Vassar College, where he met Jamie when she was a college student. The story of their love, both before and after his death, is told in her beautiful new book, Love Never Dies. And this is an extraordinary book. I loved every bit of it. It's the most beautiful true love story I've ever read. Jamie talks in her book, too, about the importance of healing our relationships with those who have died, and she gives us important techniques for healing those relationships even after our loved ones have gone ahead of us. Her book is wonderful, and so is she, so please join us next time. She's become a great friend of mine. We've been talking today about the fact that both mainstream science and mainstream Christianity, which are the most trusted institutions in the Western world, still refuse to consider the information that is basic to both their spheres just because it comes from people we used to think were dead. Much of this information has been available to them for the whole past century, sad to say. And in refusing to look at what is now overwhelmingly abundant and consistent afterlife evidence, while they still profess that they're giving us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, both Christianity and mainstream science are lying to us. Sorry to put it that way, but I don't think there's a softer way to say it. They're lying to us. They're telling us here's the truth when they should know better, because they're both confused, and because you and I can now show them, there is another place where you can look, and it will fix, frankly, the problems with both science and Christianity once you look at it. They're stonewalling, but not for much longer. Wonderfully, though, within the next few years, I believe I can see this coming. Big news is going to break that neither mainstream science nor mainstream Christianity will be able to ignore. It's coming. And that will be humankind's new beginning. The world really is about to change. So exciting times are ahead, but for now, please go out and make the most of this coming week in our one reality, knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being and you are infinitely loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.